Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Sunday, April 13th, 2025. And on Sundays, we tackle the purpose and meaning of life. This particular Sunday happens to be Palm Sunday, Sunday before Easter. So bear with me just for a moment. If you practice a non-Christian faith or if you're an agnostic or an atheist, I need to do a brief detour into the Christian tradition that'll hopefully you'll still find relevant, and it's going to be useful in terms of helping me set up our transition to today's vlog theme, which is It's a Wonderful Life. Now, according to the Gospels, Jesus was riding a donkey, a symbol of peace, when he arrived in Jerusalem just a few days before his pending crucifixion, as it turns out. And so on Palm Sunday, Catholics and Christians of many different backgrounds and faiths received palm branches in remembrance of when the Jewish people welcomed Jesus by waving and laying palms before him. And so it's a symbol, it's an important symbol of the Christian faith, including the triumph, the ultimate victory over sin and death. And so Palm Sunday represents the start then of the Holy Week that culminates with the Passion on Good Friday and then the resurrection on Easter Sunday. So now I'm not any kind of a biblical or religious scholar by any stretch of the imagination. And I have other friends, for example, who are much more knowledgeable on these matters, and even some who are actual ministers and clergy in other faiths. But beyond the more purely spiritual and religious or faith aspects of Christianity, everyone I know seems to agree that the historical Jesus embodied the essence of the highest and most noble aspects of humanity, demonstrating love and compassion and selflessness or altruism. So what does any of this then have to do with today's vlog? It's a Wonderful Life. Well, as most of you know and probably have seen, that's the name of the Frank Capra 1946 film. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen it. So the film depicts the near tragedy of George Bailey, who'd given up on his dreams to stay and help his friends and his neighbors in his hometown. But when everything seemed to be going awry, as Christmas approaches, and in his darkest moment, George Bailey, he was contemplating committing suicide, jumping off a bridge Christmas Eve. And so, but turns out he was saved by his guardian angel, Clarence, in a very unusual way. But nonetheless, he was saved, and he helps remind George of how many lives he's actually touched and how much good that he's done with his life. And he does this, of course, through a series of flashbacks. And in effect, Bailey's ordinary life ends up being depicted as rather heroic. And then he discovers ultimately what Bedford Falls would have been like if he'd never been born. So It's a Wonderful Life then has appeared often on the compilation lists of greatest films ever. It's been listed as one of the most inspirational films ever. And in 1990, the film was deemed to be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant by the U.S. Library of Congress and selected for preservation in their National Film Registry. So as for myself, I've always kind of viewed the film as a bit of kind of like a Christian allegory of sorts. There's this classic biblical arc of creation, fall, and redemption. And various characters stand in then to represent different human frailties and the vices that people have, and sometimes the ugliness that sometimes consumes individuals. And yet there's also an obvious tenderness and beauty in the film as well that counterbalances these themes. As the positive forces sometimes subtly remind us of our redemptive possibilities. So in the film then, the protagonist ends up being saved ultimately, or saving himself. And we're sort of reminded through the events that are depicted in the film that we're all sort of morally accountable, shall we say, that we shouldn't do certain things, obviously, that we shouldn't steal, uh, things that obviously belong to others or rightly belong to others, that we have to be vigilant to weed out corruption in whatever forms that might assume. And I suppose at the deepest level, the film depicts kind of a metaphor that just as Christ's life changed the whole world and the history of humanity, our individual lives can and do make a difference too. Obviously on a much smaller scale, but a difference nonetheless. And the film stresses quite powerfully one of my favorite themes as well, that of gratitude and finding the joy in even the smallest of life's blessings. And so I guess that's kind of the main message of today's vlog. If Frank Capra were alive today and planned to make the same movie about your life, what would be the main themes? What would be the stories that would be depicted on film? So, I guess in general, where did you stand up or stand on principle to make a difference? What scenes of your life sort of match that description? What were those pivotal moments when you set aside your personal interests to make sacrifices for important people in your life or just for the greater good of others? How have you been helpful in general or in the decisions that you've made, big or small, that have changed people's lives or made the world a better place in general? And I'd even ask, what are you most proud of in terms of your accomplishments? Now, let me qualify that, okay? So what I'm suggesting is that it's okay to take some pride in what you've done well. We just have to be careful about that and make sure that this isn't about our egos as such. If I'm proud of something that I've done, I'd like to think that that's because there's some value of some kind that are attached to those efforts. Intellectual value, aesthetic value, moral value. So in my view, there's nothing wrong with being proud of what you've done if you genuinely believe you've harnessed your energy and directed it to some positive effect. And so I think most of us intuitively know when that's the case. I mean, for myself, I'll walk out of a classroom sometimes and I'll just know that I've had a really good lecture, that it's made a difference, or I'll get that sense. And you almost certainly know too when you've done good work in your job or in other spheres of your life, or if you've done really good parenting, or again, a million different things. And so in general, I think we don't have to be proud in the sense of, again, stroking our own egos, but I think we can take some pride in recognizing that which we do well or that which we've done well and that has had some positive benefit, typically beyond ourselves. But even at the level of the individual self, right? If you've played, again, one of my favorite metaphors or comparisons, if you've just finished playing a basketball game and you worked really hard and you played great defense all game and you made every shot that you took and you distributed the ball to your teammates and gave out a bunch of assists and that sort of things, you'll know you had a great game and you can take some pride in that, right? But you can take some pride. You'll know when you've written something compelling, right? If you've assembled your thoughts in some compelling way, or you'll know if you've, lifted somebody's spirits in a moment or in some interaction, or you've completed a difficult task ahead of schedule, or you have managed to fast every day throughout Ramadan or through over the course of Lent, depending on your, again, faith tradition and expectations, and so on. So again, it's okay to take some pride in all of these things, by which I mean it's perfectly normal, and you should feel good about what you've done well. So again, let me be clear. It's not then about how you can sort of blow up your ego and think of yourself as better than the next person or than everyone else. The pride isn't from comparing ourselves with others or building oneself up and doing so at someone else's expense or thinking that they're less than us. It's about your positive or self-affirmation that you've been doing the right thing, whatever that might be. Again, however small, however large. That is that you're creating something of value. You're doing something meaningful or important or helpful. And it's about kind of living the right way and in accordance with your core principles, the most important principles that guide you. And you'll know that because what's the opposite when you haven't done that? The opposite would be when you feel ashamed. So if I've been doing the right thing, whatever that might be, I have a deep sense then of living a purposeful and meaningful life. On the other hand, if I'm doing the wrong thing or not committing the proper energy to the task at hand, or worst of all, if I'm hurting others with what I'm doing in my efforts, then again, speaking for myself, I almost know instantly when that's the case. And perhaps you do as well. And that's where shame or similar negative emotions come into play. And it's actually a good thing, in my view. In other words, shame or self-disappointment or a sense of letting people down, what have you, all of these things can help serve as humble reminders that A, obviously we're not perfect, which we already knew that, but B, we need to perhaps make some effort to change or to do things differently in the future. So here's a very concrete example, a little embarrassing, but what the heck. So I've been blessed to have several close friends since my childhood, but especially when I was younger, and my friends and family and others can attest, I was quite troubled at times, and despite my good qualities and the fun sides of Dr. J, there were certainly times where I could be a complete a-hole. That's the way I would put it, right? And even with my closest friends. And it might have been in the context of my, hyper-competitiveness, or my frustration at not doing well, or blaming others for my own problems, or whatever. The extended version of this is that I could not always manage my emotions in a healthy way, and sometimes that meant being aggressive, and sometimes even violent with getting into fights and that sort of thing. Again, it wasn't out of control, but sometimes I certainly felt out of control when some bad things happened or when I'd lose it emotionally, right? Okay, so one time though, this extended then into my adulthood. So one time I was about 21 at the time, I think. Don't quote me on that, but a friend of mine and I, again, a close friend, one of my best friends, we got into a really big argument, a verbal altercation, right? And about the specifics, I can't really recall. I think I made some kind of a joking comment of some kind that he took offense at, or took offense on behalf of someone else. I don't remember exactly. But I was at fault. I mean, I can say that clearly now. But the point is that I didn't acknowledge that at the time, right? And basically, I was the one that was being the jerk. I was the one kind of starting and egging things on. And I was stoking the fires of the dispute further rather than letting things simmer down or apologize or whatever. And then he didn't back down either. You have to know my friends. They're not prone to backing down either. Even to the point then where and again, I don't know what I was thinking at the time. I guess I probably wasn't thinking. I was responding emotionally and with immaturity. And so, again, I'm like about 21. We're adults, right? Young adults. And so I challenged him physically then by saying, something really aggressive like, okay, well, you want to take this outside? You want to settle this outside then? Something along those lines, okay? And my friend looked at me, kind of like, are you nuts? But what he said and did was even more powerful, and I'll never forget this, right? He basically, he looks at me and he goes, well, If you're going to threaten me with violence, I'm just going to leave. And that was all he said. And then he turned around. He walked out of the house. I remember the friend's house we were at. It was a few of us that were around. And he left. That was his message. That was his way of handling the conflict. That was his way of dealing with the person that was being the jerk. And indeed, I felt immediately like a jerk. And I felt ashamed. Right? So again, thank goodness, I guess the broader point here is that thank goodness Capra wasn't around and taking notes of my behavior and my early life especially, right? Or even maybe up to maybe the first, into my mid-20s perhaps in particular. Because if we were basing It's a Wonderful Life on those first 25 years of my life, it wouldn't have come out the same way as George Bailey, right? In other words, it would have been much more like maybe a Quentin Tarantino film, or maybe a cross between Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, or something along those lines. I'm not even sure what that means exactly. I guess simply that there would have been a lot more disturbing scenes as compared with the uplifting scenes and the redemptive scenes. Don't miss, I wasn't a sociopath, okay? So it wasn't that bad. And thankfully, I was blessed with enough intelligence or self-awareness to recognize, usually, most times, when I was being an a-hole, okay? And guess what? Here's the good news. We can actually learn about ourselves, and we can change, even in adulthood. Neuroplasticity allows for far more flexibility and growth than we ever used to imagine or realize. But of course, that requires hard work and a deep-seated commitment to changing aspects of your behavior and even to some degree your personality. So whatever your purpose and your ultimate mission in life, I want to recommend that you should build in the measures that highlight the positive scenes in those many instances when you've committed your energy to positive effect, to creative or helpful purposes. And at the same time, be open and self-aware and be able to acknowledge those times, again, if I can use my standard shorthand, when you're the a-hole in the room, right? Or in a particular encounter. And so then if the balance of your life experiences tilts towards the latter, well, then you've got some serious issues you've got to resolve. And if you don't have the self-awareness or insight to notice that, then hopefully there are others in your immediate circle, trusted souls who can help you in that direction or help point out and help you to get help, or perhaps you're seeing a counselor, whatever the case. The point is that you should definitely not have a preponderance of those instances where you're the one being the jerk or you're the one not using your energy in a positive way. Now, on the other hand, and again, this is where we want to go, if you're aspiring to live your best and most enlightened life, then you'll almost certainly know when you're doing the right thing as much as when you're doing the wrong thing. So as a simple example, I just watched my wife yesterday teaching Farsi to these young kids. She teaches a series of lessons online in the morning, and they don't always want to be there, but she brings such enthusiasm, such excitement, such big smiles, and such positive energy and positive reinforcement every time they learn to read something or repeat something, or, and she does it constantly, okay? And you can just see how much joy she spreads. Again, the kids aren't always in the best of moods or what have you. Doesn't matter. That doesn't deter her. She continues with that mission. And she does an amazing job. And I know she's kind of, from all the stories I've heard, I know she's kind of like that at work too, on her job. And maybe you're like that. You know what I mean? Don't we all see it in others, if not always in ourselves? Don't we see that goodness, that positive energy, and aren't we sort of drawn to that? Of course. And again, unfortunately, and let's be honest, we're not always at our best. myself included, and we're not always able to fully reciprocate. But you always know it when you see it. And then I don't know about you, but I hope to bring that out of myself as well, right? And that's, of course, my advice. So anyway, I'll give you one more quick example. Just this occurred to me. We were coming back from on a flight from our last vacation. And I just remember this one flight attendant who just, ceaselessly, smiled at people and tried to help them and was kind and listened carefully. Didn't take the encounters for granted at all, but was constantly, trying to do the right thing, trying to be helpful. And I couldn't believe it because it was a long flight, several hours. And his energy never faded. I don't know how he did it. And so I had to comment at the end of the flight. I literally went up to him afterwards. I said, man, I just want to thank you for your amazing energy. I saw what you were doing, for hours. And I just want you to know, I really appreciate, the positive energy that you tried to share with everyone. It was really amazing. So yeah, it was pretty glowing and I don't know, a little sappy or whatever, but I it was quite genuine. That's exactly how I felt. And he nodded. He had a smile, but he kind of knowingly smiled, not in a cocky way, but just like thanks. I do. I really appreciate that. And so in other words, I got the sense that he knows, or he knew that that's how he wants to live his life. That's how he wants to be. So good for him. So anyway, so whatever your life's mission or purpose, right? Know that every day you can make some kind of a difference by living the right way and in accordance with your core principles. And my guess is that if most of us have thought about it, and if we've had any reasonable exposure, to healthy socialization and healthy child development and moral training, broadly speaking, right? We all probably share most of the same core principles. In fact, the research shows that across cultures, there are these kind of common virtues that almost everyone admires and aspires to, right? So we know sort of what the good looks like, okay? And so if you're doing that every day, in other words, if that's your mission and you're living in accordance with those principles, then you're on the right pathway. You're on the right track. You're living a good life, maybe a wonderful life. And if you're uncertain at times, ask yourself the following. When I acted today in that situation and expended my energy to whatever cause, did I do something that was genuinely helpful, or tried to at least, or did I do some harm? If it's the latter, then ask yourself why, and what would you do differently next time? So more broadly then, I guess my deepest advice today to wrap this up is to strive to create intellectual, aesthetic, and or moral value as your main habit, as associated with your mission and main purpose in life. As I said, you can see it in others all the time. And hopefully, you can see it in yourself. And the more time and energy, then, that we commit to using these gifts that we have creatively and productively, and dare I say, even lovingly, the closer we get to making that autobiographical film one day that you can honestly title, It's a Wonderful Life. And if you're spiritually and religiously inclined, I'd suggest that's also when we know we are more connected to God and experiencing the grace of God. So in my little worldview of all of this, I'm just deeply grateful then to be able to align myself and my energy as much as possible with my understanding of God and the universe and our place in it and so forth. And I guess it's just kind of really cool to know that we can make a better and better film as our lives unfold. So mine may not yet be It's a Wonderful Life. I'm working on that, but I know I'm by the same token, I'm a long way, I'm a lifetime, it would seem, removed from the film being Inglourious Bastards or The Hateful Eight or something like that. Okay. So anyway, I truly hope for you that someday you'll be, and maybe it's today, maybe you're already there, that you'll be able to make that some version of It's a Wonderful Life, right, as a reflection on your life and what you've done and how you've made a difference. You got to work at it, okay? So until next time, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. With much love, Dr. J. We'll see you next time.